Right now, a high-stakes meeting on the future of Greenland. Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, they're meeting with their Danish and Greenlandic counterparts as President Donald Trump pushes to acquire the island. Posting earlier today, Trump says that the U.S. needs Greenland for national security. It is vital for the Golden Dome that is being built, and that, quote, NATO becomes far more formidable and effective with Greenland in the hands of the United States.
Something pretty dramatic happened. A federal judge just held a lawyer from the Trump administration in contempt of court for blatantly ignoring court orders. This isn't some gentle reminder. This judge is making it clear that the Justice Department broke the law. At the same time, a New Jersey judge is demanding that the Justice Department investigate itself for violating over 50 court orders related to detention cases. Judges around the country are starting to notice a troubling trend of Trump's Justice Department treating judicial rulings like they can just discover more of them if they feel like it.
Some federal judges across the country are getting increasingly upset with the Trump administration for not complying with their orders in cases involving immigrants. The New York Times reports, quote, at least 35 times since August, federal judges have ordered the administration to explain why it should not be punished for violating their orders in immigration cases. For instance, one judge ordered an immigrant be released from custody in Minnesota, but instead the man was let go in El Paso.
And it seems judges are fed up. They're getting more aggressive, imposing contempt findings, threatening sanctions, and warning that if this continues, federal officials might face even stricter consequences, potentially even jail time. This civil contempt ruling means that a Trump administration attorney has officially been found to have violated a court order. According to CNN and local reports, this marks the first time in Trump's second term that a federal attorney has faced such a sanction.
And also, we cannot allow a handful of communist radical left judges to obstruct the enforcement of our laws and assume the duties that belong solely to the President of the United States.
When President Trump lost a battle in court to deport migrants, he called the judge a lunatic. When immigration crackdowns were ruled illegal, he called the judges monsters. It's incendiary comments like that that have provoked a torrent of death threats. Our reporting found hundreds of threats were left on judges' voicemails.
After weeks of judges in Minnesota warning the Department of Justice and IC about their ongoing noncompliance, it seems the warnings fell on deaf ears. Now, the judges are stepping up and using their power to hold government lawyers accountable. This issue is also surfacing in New Jersey, where a court-ordered review forced the DOJ to acknowledge 52 violations out of 547 cases.
The DOJ is now admitting that they knowingly violated a judge's order.
The federal judge announced last week he is starting a criminal contempt inquiry to find out which officials were responsible for ignoring his orders. Back in March, he told the Trump administration they couldn't use the Alien Enemies Act. So according to the Department of Justice court filing, Noam ordered her department to keep the flights going.
So here's the deal. The Department of Justice has been really dropping the ball lately. They totally ignored judges' orders by transferring immigrants when they specifically said not to. They missed bond hearing deadlines 17 times and completely failed to produce evidence that courts ordered them to show 12 times. We're not talking about just a few slip-ups here. This is a serious pattern of defying the law. In response, what did the DOJ do? They issued a statement saying, "We deeply regret all violations for which our office is responsible." Really? As if saying sorry for breaking the law 52 times somehow makes everything okay. Judges aren't buying that excuse because they see this isn't just an accident.
If the Trump administration started defying orders from the courts, right? You remember all those discussions? Well, the Trump administration is now routinely and frequently defying orders from judges, specifically on cases relating to immigrants. And the courts have not only figured out that that's happening, the courts have now decided to stand up and fight for themselves.
It's clearly purposeful. And get this, a recent analysis by the Washington Post revealed that officials from Trump's administration have been accused of either ignoring or dragging their feet on about 1/3 of the more than 160 cases where courts have ruled against them. That means whenever Trump loses in court, there's a 1 in 3 chance they'll just blow it off or do the bare minimum, making the court's orders pointless. This isn't how things are supposed to work in government. When a court gives an order, the executive branch is expected to follow through. That's the whole idea behind separation of powers and checks and balances. But Trump's DOJ seems to think they can pick and choose which rulings to follow depending on their personal feelings. And judges are finally saying, nope, that's not acceptable. We're going to sanction you until you start playing by the rules. And the sanctions are serious business, finding contempt, hitting them with financial penalties. And judges have even warned that if this behavior continues, things could escalate further with the potential of jail time for federal officials guilty of contempt. That's how intense this situation is getting. Judges know that if they don't enforce their orders and hold people accountable, their authority becomes meaningless and the entire judicial system falls apart. So, let's take a closer look at what's been happening, why Trump's DOJ keeps flouting court decisions, and what the judges can actually do about it to grasp the seriousness of the situation. Let's start with the case in Minnesota. Judge Laura Pruvnino had an immigrant in custody, and the government's reasons for keeping him there were pretty flimsy. She ordered his release by February 13th, but didn't stop there. She laid out clear instructions. He was to be released in Minnesota, right where the case was being heard, and all his belongings, including his identification documents and personal items, were to be returned. It's really not complicated. Release him in a specific place by a specific date and hand over everything. Any competent government agency should easily follow those orders. But ICE and the Department of Justice didn't deliver. They let him go, sure, but then they put him on a bus or a plane to Texas, which is hundreds of miles away from where the judge said he should be released. Plus, they still kept his ID documents. So, here's someone dropped into a state where he knows no one, has no way to get around, and can't even prove who he is or access any services. Now, you might think, oh, maybe this was just a mistake. The kind-hearted explanation could be that ICE is just so buried in their work that they can't keep track of who should be released and where. But let's be real, the less charitable and likely more accurate take is that they did this on purpose. It seems they intentionally chose not to follow the judge's order because they didn't agree with it. They followed the bare minimum just to say they released him without actually complying. Judge Pruvnino wasn't fooled by this. She saw exactly what happened and called it for what it was. Flagrant disobedience of court orders. That's some strong wording. It means the defiance was clear and intentional, not just an oops moment. So, she held the attorney from the Trump administration in civil contempt, which is her way of formally saying this lawyer violated a court order and decided to impose some penalties. Now, civil contempt is different from criminal contempt. When someone faces criminal contempt, it's about being punished for showing disrespect to the court or getting in the way of justice. And yes, that could lead to jail time. But civil contempt is more about getting compliance. It's like the judge saying, "You didn't follow my order, so here are some penalties until you do." Those penalties can involve fines, added reporting requirements, or limits on what the government can do. So, there's been this really interesting situation unfolding in Minnesota regarding the Department of Justice. Judge Pruvnino made it clear that the government was ignoring his orders, and now he's decided to take action by holding them in contempt. This isn't just a slap on the wrist. It's a serious warning. He's essentially saying, "You've ignored me, and now I'm going to sanction you. If you keep this up, things are going to get worse." What's significant here is that this is the first time during Trump's second term that a federal attorney has faced contempt charges, which indicates that judges are starting to take firmer stances. They've been giving out warnings for weeks, but those clearly fell on deaf ears. So now they're ready to flex their authority. Meanwhile, over in New Jersey, the situation gets even stickier. A judge instructed the DOJ to review how well they were following court orders, and the results weren't pretty. The DOJ had to admit to 52 violations across 547 cases. Let's break that down a bit. There were 17 forbidden transfers, meaning judges specifically told ICE not to move certain immigrants from one facility to another. But ICE did it anyway. Judges usually issue no transfer orders to ensure that immigrants can access their legal representation or attend their hearings, and ICE disregarded those orders 17 times. Then there were 12 missed bond hearing deadlines. When someone is detained, they have a right to their hearing within a certain time frame, which allows a judge to decide if they should be released on bond while their case is pending. But the DOJ missed this deadline 12 times, leaving folks sitting in detention longer than necessary because the government couldn't keep up with its own schedule. Also, There were 10 instances where the DOJ failed to produce court-ordered evidence. When a judge asks for documents or evidence, the government is supposed to provide it, but they didn't do that 10 times. This failure meant lawyers couldn't properly represent their clients and judges couldn't make informed decisions because the government withheld critical information. And this is just what the DOJ owned up to. There could very well be more violations that they didn't uncover during their self-read not to report. The bottom line is that this isn't just a series of unfortunate errors by overwhelmed government workers. It's a systematic issue. You know, it's really something to see how some folks just seem to ignore court orders when it suits them. The Department of Justice responded recently by expressing deep regret over all those violations. But let's be honest, just saying sorry doesn't fix the real problems. It doesn't make things right for the immigrants who were moved illegally, kept too long, or denied their access to crucial evidence. If the Department of Justice truly felt bad about these issues, they'd be changing their procedures to prevent them from happening again. But there's not much evidence that's happening. Instead, they seem to be banking on judges being lenient. But the judges are catching on, thanks to a thorough analysis by the Washington Post, which looked into more than 160 cases where Trump's officials lost in court. They found that in about one-third of those situations, the administration was accused of not following court orders or deliberately dragging things out. That's a huge number. And it's not just about immigration matters either. There have been delays and refusals in areas like environmental regulations, voting rights, and government transparency. Anytime they face a court ruling they don't like, it seems they take their time complying or just find loopholes to technically follow the rules while undermining their intent. This behavior creates a real constitutional crisis since the foundation of our government relies on each branch respecting the authority of the others. Congress makes laws, the executive branch enforces them, and the courts interpret those laws and settle disputes. When the executive branch chooses to ignore judicial orders, it undermines the whole system. It raises the question of why anyone should bother going to court if the government can simply turn a blind eye to legal decisions. Judges are finally waking up to the need to address this situation. They can't just issue orders and hope that the executive branch will comply anymore. They have to actively enforce those orders. This might mean using contempt powers, imposing fines, or even threatening jail time for noncompliance, because if judges don't stand up for their authority, who will? We are currently seeing the civil contempt phase where judges are handing down fines and sanctions to government lawyers. But if the defiance keeps up, things could escalate to criminal contempt, which might lead to U.S. Marshals arresting ICE officials or Department of Justice lawyers. It's definitely a serious situation that could get even more intense. The situation with Trump's Department of Justice is really quite serious. They've been willfully ignoring court orders, and judges are facing a tough decision on how to respond. On one hand, they could go as far as imposing jail sentences, but that would be a pretty drastic move. Imagine the uproar. Trump would probably start yelling about judicial overreach, and the Republicans in Congress would likely launch attacks on the judges. It could easily spiral into a chaotic political drama. But if judges don't take action, then Trump's DOJ could just keep doing whatever they want, ignoring court orders without repercussions. And let's be honest, if one administration gets away with that, future administrations might do the same. Before you know it, judicial rulings would lose all significance, and we wouldn't have a working separation of powers anymore. Judges are clearly in a tight spot. They have to defend their authority and enforce their rulings. But standing firm could spark a constitutional crisis, making the current drama look like a walk in the park. In a bid to avoid that chaos, they're starting with lighter sanctions and gradually escalating, hoping that one day Trump's DOJ will get the hint and start following the rules. Against DOJ lawyers and